In the early summer of 1947, Bedouins entered a dusty cave along a rocky escarpment near the Dead Sea and not far from ruins that had long been ravaged by the Romans, having set in nearly 2,000 years of near-forgotten silence. Within the cave, the nomads had come upon a treasure, not of gold or silver or jewels, but a treasure on ancient leather bedecked with tiny Hebrew letters. This cave, Cave 1, was the first of roughly 8 dozen that would yield hundreds of ancient manuscripts and thousands of fragments of manuscripts that we now refer to as the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the first, perhaps the very first discovered, was a rather mutilated roll of brown leather containing 19 columns of text whose contents are shocking in their apocalyptic content. They're an otherwise unknown Hebrew text detailing the final battle between the sons of light, led by the angel Michael, and the sons of darkness, led by the archdemon Belial, before the advent of the final utopian Messianic kingdom. Further, similar documents, often in fragmentary form from Cave 4, would also come to light, all together revealing an apocalyptic vision of that future battle, detailing tactics, the arms and armaments of the combatants, even the inscriptions on their war banners, trumpets, and spearheads. These documents, once referred to as the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, are now simply known as the War Scroll, or the War Texts. This collection of texts provides us the most important glimpse into an ancient worldview for which a final world-ending battle would set the stage for the very end of history itself. A motif taken up by early Christianity, now a basic trope of apocalyptic art, literature, film, and pop culture generally. What do these texts among the earliest on the topic reveal about the development of the concept of this final apocalyptic war? In this episode, I'll be exploring the war literature as it's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Gnostic text, or ancient mystery religions, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content on topics in ancient esotericism. Also, if you want to support my work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics like this in ancient esotericism here on YouTube for free, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on Patreon or with a one-time donation. Of course, this channel is only possible with your support, and you can find those links below. I do really appreciate you taking the time to consider supporting the channel. But now, let's peer into the apocalyptic future by exploring the apocalyptic past as found in the War Scrolls of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The war literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls is generally composed of the central war scroll from Cave 1, along with a host of fragmentary texts mostly recovered from Cave 4, literally a stone's throw away from the site at Qumran. These texts detail a final apocalyptic battle between the forces of good, known as the Sons of Light, led by the Archangel Michael, and the forces of evil, or the Sons of Darkness, led by the archdemon Belial. While Michael is relatively well known, who was Belial? Belial, or in Hebrew Belial, his name literally means worthless or the worthless one, began in the Hebrew Bible simply as an insult, mostly for denoting people as, well, good for nothings, which is actually a pretty good translation of his name, good for nothing. By the Second Temple period, this phrase had become personified as the leader of the demonic hordes, along with other epithets such as Samael, Baalzebul, or, well, Satan more generally. In fact, Belial seems to have been the preferred name of this entity during this period, and it even occurs in the New Testament at 2 Corinthians 6:15, where Paul asks, what harmony does Belial have with Christ, setting him as the polar opposite to Josh. Well, his friends know him as JC, but when he was growing up in Nazareth, he was just Josh from Nazareth. In fact, this is probably one of the most important aspects of the War Scroll, the glimpse that it provides us into the development of the apocalyptic notion of a final eschatological battle such as Armageddon in the New Testament. Certainly in the War Scroll, this notion is pretty fully mature and even takes on cosmic significance. But to grasp this development, let's review the history of cosmological warfare in the ancient Near East more generally. A founding myth in the Levant is the so-called Chaos Kampf, a tale in which primordial chaos is conquered by the divine in the process of creating our world, the cosmos. Whether Marduk slaughtering Tiamat, Baal conquering the sea and kind of defeating death, or Yahweh's struggle with the sea monster Leviathan, the cosmic war trope began its history with that war taking place in the primeval past, with history as a process of ordered laws presided over by the divine. History is just that period where the divine monarch imposes order onto chaos. But there was a bug and a feature in this myth, at least for the ancient Israelites. The Israelite version of this myth, unlike the general Mesopotamian or Ugaritic versions, also eventually has Yahweh making a pact with his vassals, the Israelites. This pact is basically a kind of vassal treaty such that the Israelites will be provided land, descendants upon that land, and general agricultural success, prosperity, and peace if they observe a complex set of moral and ritual rules revealed to them by their prophet, Moses. You may have heard of the guy, a belief system scholars now often refer to as the Deuteronomistic theology. Deuteronomistic theology. It's kind of a mouthful. They might need a rebranding. So far, so good, but here's the bug. The Israelites and the Judeans' polity were destroyed by rival nations. The peace was shattered, their land was stolen, and their people were exiled. In a strict reading of the Deuteronomistic theology, the Israelites should have also been totally wiped out as well for their disobedience, although some later texts do include the possibility of a righteous remnant, but they weren't wiped out. They were deported eventually to Babylon starting in 586 before the Common Era, only to kind of flourish there, even if in captivity, before being allowed to return home by the Persians. What followed were further Greek invasions, wars of independence, Roman invasions, and eventually genocidal violence in their own homeland. But this was when the feature appeared. A new form of Israelite theology known as the Apocalyptic emerged, whereby the pacifying mythology of the primeval past was transposed into the not-so-distant future. The myth structure was reversed. Clearly, chaos and violence had not been conquered by God in the primordial past. I mean, look around, says the Judahites. There's plenty of chaos. Rather, the cosmic war myth will happen in the future, and then a final peace will stretch over all of creation. That transposition, of course, happened slowly in the myth structure. Early on in the book of Daniel, for instance, a final political battle between Israel and the mysterious Gog and Magog will eventually establish quasi-Messianic self-rule for the Israelite polity. This fight is already in that text tied to various angels of the nations. For instance, Michael is the angelic leader of Israel, but becomes a full-fledged cosmic struggle between good and evil in the later development of the myth structure. Of course, it has achieved full maturity by the composition of the Christian Apocalypse of John, composed around the year 100 of the Common Era, in which that final battle is named Armageddon. This is truly ingenious writing. Har Megiddo is an artificial mountain, kind of, in the Jezreel Valley made up of over 24 layers of destruction as it was conquered, destroyed, and rebuilt, given its decisive importance in the ancient trade routes in that region. The much fought after Har Megiddo becomes metonymized into the site of the apocalyptic Armageddon of Christian eschatology. But to get there, we have to understand the war scrolls and the war literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a decisive step in the development of this idea, an idea with as much cultural currency now as ever before. The War Scroll and similar literature, this would include 1QM, 1Q33, which is actually just a part of 1QM that came off when it was being unrolled, and the numerous fragments from Cave 4, especially 4Q491 through 7 and 4Q471, among others, is a complex narrative describing a final apocalyptic battle against who the text refer to as the Kittim, along with a host of other nations before the advent of the utopian messianic rulership. The texts are anonymous but seem tied to the temple protest community generally known as the Essenes, though they never called themselves that. It seems they preferred the term Yachad, or community. They formed, it appears, in protest to what they felt was corrupt leadership taking control of the Jerusalem temple, along with several other different sectarian differences. Interestingly enough, some of those sectarian differences included calendrical issues actually taken from the book of Enoch. If you're interested in that topic, make sure to check out my episode on those issues in the card above. The war text either establish or support or both a general dualistic metaphysics held by the Yachad, in which God has created the world such that two opposing principles dominate: the spirit of light and truth, along with the spirit of injustice and darkness. As described in the community rule, these two spirits exist in equal measure, led by the Prince of Light, or the angel Michael, and the angel of darkness, or Belial, and will persist until the very end of time, in which God will personally destroy the forces of evil, along with the people that align themselves with it. Evil, that is. While the community rule, which details how to live according to God and under the protection of the angel of light, denote that only on the final day of the visitation, as it refers to it, will God utterly destroy evil, it's actually in the war literature that this is spelled out in detail. The War Scroll seems to have been influenced by later sections of the book of Daniel, thus it couldn't have been written before 164 BCE, and it seems that the community itself, the Yachad, was destroyed or perished in the Great Revolt of 66 to 73 of the Common Era. Though more precise dating might be had from some of the internal references within the War Scroll. For instance, there is a reference to a king of the Kittim, which might be an indicator of the Roman emperor, but could just as well be a reference to a Seleucid king, and especially the details about the arms, armament, and tactics employed during the final apocalyptic battle, all of which might again point to a Roman period dating, at least for those sections. More on that in a moment. Further, there's a good deal of scholarly debate about the exact textual composition of the war literature. Some scholars see the text as one narrative unit, composed probably in the Roman period, while others see an accretion of text stretching back to the Seleucid period all the way up to the Roman period, edited together in such a way that the narrative seem to show from time to time, especially in the specific war against the Kittim and the more general war of divisions against a whole host of nations, ostensibly the entire ancient world. Personally, I'm more convinced of the arguments for the composite nature of the text, but these arguments are so deeply technical that one should consult them yourself to see what you think. When I think they matter, the idea that this is one text or a composite text, I'll make sure to mention it as I discuss it, but regardless, we can still discuss the text as we have it, regardless of its unified or composite redaction. The text describes a two-part war, a war of divisions and a final battle against the Kittim, often a code word for the Greeks or more often the Romans, in which the priest-led Israelite army will strike out and will, with divine assistance, defeat the various nations of the world, thus ushering in the Messianic kingdom. This war will be administered by priest generals over a span of 40 years, including various years of rest, in which the tide of the war will alternate 6 times between the sons of light and the sons of darkness before divine intervention ends the conflict decisively in the 7th lot. It's unclear if the text is discussing a two-part war or if it's actually a composite in which distinct war texts have been edited together into a whole. Again, scholars differ on this. However, after outlining the general landscape of the war, the text then turns to a prolonged discussion of what it clearly takes to be important: the exacting details of war trumpets, banners, and arms and armaments, all of which are meticulously written upon with quasi-magical inscriptions. I say these are important for the writer and community because, one, the outcome of the battle is already determined in true apocalyptic fashion, and two, they continue over several columns of the text, making up a significant percentage of the war scroll. This really seems to have mattered to the writers. The arms and armor are of a special interest here because they may give us solid clues into the Roman or pre-Roman dating of the material. In fact, scholars have deduced that the kit, formation, and tactics described by the scroll are deeply informed by actual military life of the day. Specifically, they appear to emerge from a transitional period in the Roman army just before the Marian reforms. In fact, Gomericon even proffers an exact date as the summer of 163 before the Common Era for the compilation of the text by someone deeply familiar with the Maccabean War, perhaps even serving in the Maccabean War. In fact, his analysis is in debate with Yadin's very famous analysis, which sees them as post-Marian, even imperial in nature, and this would make an utterly fascinating video comparing the two arguments, but it's a bit outside my wheelhouse. Though, I'm looking at you, kings and generals, this would make a really cool episode of your channel. With the details of the units and how they're to be outfitted laid out, again, this is all led by a group of priest generals and the high priest as a kind of human generalissimo, all of which is metaphysically mirrored by the archangel Michael against the evil human forces led by the demon general Belial. The battle commences, which is led by a series of trumpet blasts. The trumpets of massacre have "the mighty hand of God in war shall cause all the ungodly slain to fall" written upon it, just in case you were curious. Exact details govern the ages of the combatants and their auxiliaries. Oddly, the age of the soldiers and the officers tend to be a bit older, between 40 and 50 years of age, with inspectors between 50 and 60 years of age, and auxiliaries even younger, between 25 and 30. Where the 30 to 40-year-old men are in all this isn't immediately clear to me. Further, we're told the army is to be fully volunteer. There's no conscription for this army. And another odd aspect of the Sons of Light is that while the priests direct the battle, they do not and cannot participate in it given the presence of blood, which would ritually invalidate them. Again, this may seem odd, but ultimately it doesn't matter because the outcome of the battle is preordained. The pitched battles will oscillate initiative until direct divine intervention decisively settles the matter. The battles are punctuated by a series of war psalms meant to encourage the fighting. In this way, the battles are a bit Ragnarok-like. The outcome is settled in advance, but people still suffer and die in the fighting. This suffering is referred to in the text as a divine mystery or as a crucible, as if the suffering unto death of the warriors is an act of purification. Some of the war psalms are evocative in their theological anarchism, mocking kings and the mighty among men in praise of divine glory. In the final convulsions of war, the high priest takes center stage, mirrored by the archangel Michael, and the armies of the sons of darkness, along with Belial, are utterly defeated and cast into a pit by God, a motif echoed in the Apocalypse of John. The next morning has the surviving soldiers, and perhaps even all of the slain resurrected by God, returning to the battlefield after undergoing ritual purification and enjoining in a final triumphant hymn of morning prayer. With the war of divisions and then the war against the Kittim settled, the path is then paved for the arrival of the Messianic King. Sadly, it's just this section that's destroyed in 1QM, but at least something of it can be reconstructed from the Cave 4 fragments. There, it seems that just as Belial and his host are cast into the pit of destruction, so too will the king of the Kittim be captured, put on trial, and eventually executed by the Messianic branch of David. This inaugurates the Messianic era, where the land blooms, children thrive, wild beasts depart, disease ends, and the sword finally and utterly disappears from history. You know, that whole swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks business. Sounds nice, aside from the whole disastrous apocalyptic war part. Even the angels and the holy name of God are said to dwell among the congregation in the aftermath of this eschatological battle. Further texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls, including fragments written in a mysterious cryptic code, describe the coming Messiah and the Messianic age, and I'll be returning to them in a future episode for sure, so stay tuned for that. What became of the community that composed the Serech HaMilchama, or the War Rule? We'll likely never really know. They vanished, leaving their scrolls to molder in the caves near the Dead Sea, though I think this text may provide a grim possible insight into their end. Such a document may have originally been written as a kind of apocalyptic revenge fantasy where an oppressed people see in the future divine-backed victory, thus providing solace and hope, even glee in the future oppressor's doom. But I think such a text would have also come to function as prophetic, future-oriented, describing the future to come as well. In this way, I'm speculating, and to be clear, I'm speculating here, I think that the Great Revolt against the Romans may have been read as an inauguration of the end of time as described in these texts by the community. The Yachad, or the Essenes as Josephus denotes them, seems to have actually taken the field. We even learn the name of one of their commanders, a certain strategos or general named Yochanan, who fell at the Battle of Ascalon. In fact, if Josephus is to be trusted, and Josephus can kind of be trusted, that battle was nothing short of a complete massacre, with numerous Essenes being slaughtered. The others that were caught suffered an even worse fate. Josephus tells us, quote, "They make light of danger and triumph over pain by their resolute will. Death, if it comes with honor, they consider better than immortality. The war with the Romans tried their souls through and through by every variety of test, racked and twisted, broken and burnt, and made to pass through every instrument of torture in order to induce them to blaspheme their lawgiver or eat some forbidden thing. They refused to yield to either demand, nor even once did they cringe to their persecutors or ever even shed a tear. Smiling in their agonies and mildly deriding their tormentors, they cheerfully resigned their souls, confident that they would receive them back again." I suspect that such bravery and stoicism, which Josephus no doubt thought would earn his Roman audiences respect for the Jews more generally, and of course that's the point of the Jewish war, it's a book of propaganda in defense of the Jews, could have actually endured in the light of the determinism of the war scroll. God, after all, would decide the contest, with such suffering being a mystery and a crucible of purification for that community. Such stoicism is made easier if you believe that you'll laugh last. Perhaps the Yachad marched out to battle with their trumpets and their banners, expecting heavy sustained losses, all the while expecting divine intervention at the last desperate moment, a moment that never came for them. Of course, God didn't appear. The revolt was a true disaster, and it seems that the Yachad was practically annihilated during the war, leaving their scrolls to wait in the gloom of those caves for millennia. A survival, yeah, but not the one they imagined. The War Scroll and similar texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls are among the most evocative of the apocalyptic finality of world events in all of ancient literature. Their exacting details of quasi-magical inscriptions on trumpets and banners, the near-to-life military tactics, and the cosmological scale of the conflict all to come together to form a text of simultaneous dread and grandeur. Indeed, the Apocalypse of John, which has fueled imaginations for millennia, can only be appreciated as part of the eschatological landscape of the Sirach HaMilchama, which is a decisive text only known to us in its recent discovery in the caves of the Dead Sea. The most accessible edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which contains all of the texts discussed in this episode, is that of Vermes. Penguin Classics has a wonderful, inexpensive edition, which is as scholarly as it is accessible. The best close study of the war text from the Dead Sea Scrolls is the text of that name by Jean Duhaime. Another deeper dive is the recent study by Brian Schultz called Conquering the World, which is really good, especially at the seams of the text, but it is way more technical and published by our good friends over at Brill, so you have to auction off your children to get it. Each chapter of the Duhaime text contains an extensive bibliography that should keep you busy for decades. There's a lot of literature in there, so have fun with that. Also, when your battle plan is God will save us at the last minute, you might want to sit that one out. More on the Dead Sea Scrolls to come. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thanks for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.